In this video, I'll talk about why the words that we use with the dogs that we train matter, and some of the common pitfalls that anybody can run into when they are teaching a dog different behaviors. So one of the things that I've talked about in a lot of my training videos is the idea that you don't use a cue for a behavior until you've seen that the dog is physically capable of doing that action. So when you are teaching the dog sit, you don't start adding in the word sit until you've seen that the puppy is able to follow your hand lure and their rear is touching the ground and they go through the entire motion successfully. You don't add in that word for it until the puppy is able to consistently move into that position. And the reasoning for that is when I am teaching the dog something, if the dog does the opposite of what it is that I was trying to get them to do, I've used a cue that I don't want associated with that opposite behavior. So if I ask the dog to sit, and the dog doesn't know what sit means yet, and the dog offers a down instead, that can get confusing and can create mixed signals for a dog. So I don't want to use the cue that I'm trying to teach the dog that behavior until I've seen that they're able to do it. One of the ones that ends up getting accidentally what's called poisoned, and that's when the cue becomes a negative meaning, or it just changes meaning entirely from what you wanted it to be. And that is the cue come, so calling the dog to you. Usually what ends up happening is if you've got a fenced in yard, or let's say you have the dog on a long line or just anywhere in the house, and you want the dog to come back to you, so you say come, but after several repetitions of that, the dog can learn that when I'm in the backyard and my human calls me from the back door with that command, my fun time outside ends. And I don't want it to end. So now I'm not going to listen to that word. Or if I use that command to call the dog to me to then put them in the crate, especially if I'm doing that in a form of punishment, the dog will learn that command means I'm going to go over there and I'm going to get put in the crate and my person is mad and I don't want anything to do with it. So even though the dog has some good associations with that command, if you build up negative associations with a command, you can create conflict in the dog because they're not sure which result they're going to get. And so that can cause stress because the dog doesn't reliably know what their behavior is going to result in, which can cause stress. That's like if I was sitting next to you in the car and sometimes when you went 5 miles over the speed limit, I snapped you with a rubber band, and sometimes when you went 5 miles over the speed limit, I gave you $1. That would cause you some stress because you're not sure which option I'm going to go with. And one of those options is something that you're not going to enjoy. So if you've got a dog, for example, that doesn't want to come when called, you want to consider, when am I using the cue? Am I creating situations where that is getting a negative connotation to it? And if that's the case, then we want to start working on building back up only those positive associations of every time I call you, you get a cookie. Every time I call you, you get a cookie. And sometimes you might have to come inside, but when you come inside, I'm then going to give you your favorite toy, so you'll get to play with that favorite toy. Or sometimes we stand at the door and I call you to me, and when you respond, I give you that cookie, but then playtime is allowed to continue for another 5-10 minutes. Another one that happens quite frequently is with leave it. Leave it is a command. That's something that we typically say just right off the cuff because we don't want the dog to go after something that we walk past on the ground. And so we instinctively say leave it but that doesn't mean anything to the dog yet. Or what often happens is that we say, leave it, leave it, leave it, and we pull the dog past. Nothing happens after we pull the dog past, and so that drive to get that object on the floor is still really strong. So what we can do instead, if we have a dog with a strong name response, which is something that we start practicing with puppies from the beginning, is when there is something that you don't want them to get to, call their name so that they turn away from that distraction. If they don't turn away from the distraction, then we need to continue to build name response, or we are too close to that distraction and we haven't practiced enough in close proximity to a high level distraction, which again just takes practice. So you want to avoid using leave it unless it is a command that you reinforce when the dog listens to. So leave it should be the equivalent of ignore that, look at me instead. So when I say leave it, I want my dog to turn his head away from that thing and look towards me. And then he is going to get a treat, or I'm going to throw him a party. I'm going to do something exciting, so that leave it clearly means do not engage with this, engage with me instead. With any cue that you are using, regardless of the two examples that I just gave, those are the two most common ones that I see issues pop up with, but you could, in theory, poison any cue if every time I say sit, I follow it up with, I bop my dog in the head for whatever reason. I'm not sure why you would do that. Hopefully you don't do that. But if a cue is followed by a punishment of some sort, even if I reinforce the cue, so even if I tell my dog sit, I reward, but then something bad happens, that cue is going to be poisoned because it precedes something bad. So you want to be really mindful of the words that you are using and the context in which you are using them. As always, if there's something going on that you're not sure about, contact me and we'll talk through it and we'll figure it out. This is a very common problem that we have people run into, and it's things that I've done as well, that I suddenly realize, oh shoot, I used a word there and now I've created an association that I don't want. So it's a pretty easy thing to do. It happens quite frequently, but it's definitely something to consider when we are troubleshooting why is the dog acting the way that it is. A large part of the time it's because we have unintentionally created an association that we did not mean to create. So as always, if you have any questions, you can contact myself and Julie, and we will be more than happy to help you.